I just got back from a week-long filming expedition in Baja California where I brought a ton of gear with me, including my trusty RED Komodo X here. Now, if you watch my videos, you'll know that I absolutely love this camera. It's so versatile, and I've really been able to use it in plenty of different shooting scenarios over the past year. This camera really can handle anything that I've thrown at it. However, it's more of like a production camera. I usually use it for interview setups or if I'm filming wildlife at a distance. It's really good for those scenarios. It's great when it's totally rigged up with mics and top handles and different accessories. But during certain situations, like this trip, for example, I was filming on a small boat with a couple different people on it. We were really limited on space. Not to say that it's horribly big or anything, but it just can be a little much. And honestly, on this trip, I kind of just left it in the hotel room and didn't use it really at all. I didn't really have any subjects I was following. I didn't need to mic up anybody. I wasn't putting a long, 600mm lens on this thing and filming a wolf in the distance or whatever. Because the use case was a little bit different for this trip, I really didn't need it. I really just found myself reaching for my old workhorse, and I was really, really impressed with the diversity of shots I was able to capture. So my old workhorse that I'm filming this on now is the original Canon R5. And in my experience, I really think this could be the most versatile wildlife camera ever made. You can see the EVF is all bruised and battered. There's salt corrosion all over it. The memory card door is hanging on by a thread, literally. I wouldn't say I'm particularly or purposefully hard on my gear, but traveling around the world filming wildlife, I am putting it in situations that require a lot out of these cameras. This camera has been on pretty much every boat imaginable, filming a variety of different subjects in different environments. Its versatility is unmatched, and here's why. I used this camera in 4 different shooting scenarios on this shoot, and it shined in each one. To start, I used this camera for its intended use, photography. Boasting a 45 megapixel sensor, the Canon R5 is a stellar photography camera. The images it creates are super detailed, and again, that big 45 megapixel sensor allows me to crop in to however far I really need. I typically only use the mechanical shutter, which can shoot up to 12 frames per second, but if you need a little bit more juice out of it, the electronic shutter can get up to 20 frames per second. Now, while this doesn't really hold a stick at some of the cameras today, which can shoot at 50 plus frames per second, I think if you can't really capture a wildlife moment with 12 frames per second, then you might want to practice more. It's certainly not the camera. Sorry. Didn't mean to be harsh. Now, some of my favorite wildlife images ever were captured on this camera, and in terms of photography, it still is just such a beast. Here's some of my favorite Baja moments captured on this camera. I later threw on a 16-35 and kind of used it as an all-around or behind-the-scenes camera. I was filming the people on board with us, our captain driving, and looking through the binoculars trying to find wildlife. Really just capturing the experience of being out at sea, giving my audience a behind-the-scenes look to what these expeditions look like. This camera really shined in that scenario. The in-body image stabilization is good enough to where it can, get some really nice shots while moving at speed. I don't really ever get that kind of wobble. I don't know if it's because I'm using older EF lenses, but I haven't really ever had that big wobble issue that some people talk about. I really just know this camera through and through, so using it as a BTS camera is really quick. It's really intuitive. I can switch frame rates really quickly. And I think the image, whether I'm shooting in 4K or 8K, really holds up to, the modern cameras of today. So then I took that same 16 to 35 package with the R5 and threw it into my underwater housing. And man, I was just really still impressed with the shots that I was able to capture. We had some pretty decent viz while diving with whale sharks. I was able to capture some truly breathtaking shots. This housing isn't horribly big, and when you throw the Canon in there, it's really doable to use. I can still maneuver really well in the water. You'd think these big lumbering giant whale sharks would be pretty slow, but trust me, they can really get a move on when they really need to. One of the sharks actually slowed down at some point and was kind of vertically feeding at the surface of the water. So I was able to kind of, in a moment's notice, dive down and kind of get this nice silhouetted shot with the sun rays coming down, kind of making the shark look really angelic. So having a housing that's small enough and quick enough, a camera that's small enough and quick enough to maneuver in these situations, I'm not shooting on a giant RED that weighs 60 pounds, so it's just tough to maneuver through the water. The small size is really, really an advantage when filming underwater. And definitely having that full frame sensor underwater helps, allowing in a whole bunch more light than, say, a Super 35 counterpart. Being able to switch between 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second in a moment's notice is super helpful when trying to slow some of that motion down. There's some of those shots where the whale sharks are opening their mouth, pumping the water through their mouth and their gills, filtering some of those plankton out, and be able to slow that motion down really creates some dramatic shots. For some of these tighter shots, most of these shots are pretty wide, but I was able to zoom in a little bit and get like this shot of the whale shark's tail going by kind of in the corner of the frame. Really just adds to the sequence when putting together, a whole sequence on these sharks. I've said it before and I'll say it again, coming back to the image quality, I think it still holds up for a 5-year-old camera. I think it still looks great. It might not have some of the higher specs that the Canon R5 II might have. It doesn't have C-Log 2, it only has C-Log 3. It doesn't have 8K 60, it just has 8K 30. But still, I think for putting together wildlife sequences, it still can capture some incredible shots. And that's really why I just keep going back to it. So the fourth kind of shooting scenario that I put this camera through, throughout the trip, we were encountering these pretty large groups of common dolphins. On one day in particular, they were close enough to shore where the beautiful iron-rich backdrops of, the Baja California peninsula were bright and in sight of this pod of dolphins. Putting your subject in place can be hard when filming out in the open ocean. Typically, you're just in a blue vastness of nothing, It's kind of hard to give your audience that context. But here, with these dolphins super close to shore, I really wanted to capture those backdrops with the dolphins as well. Yeah, I could throw up a drone and, capture a big wide. It's just not as intimate. I really wanted to pull those beautiful red mountains back into the picture. And that's really only possible with a telephoto lens. So I threw the Canon R5 and a 70-200 on the RS3 Pro and captured some of my favorite shots during the entire trip. If you watched my last video, you'll know I tried a similar setup with the Komodo X. And while I was able to eventually get it to work and capture some really nice shots, it's just a little bit of a cumbersome experience, throwing the RED monitor on there, powering it with a V-mount, throwing a focus motor on there because it doesn't have autofocus. It just made it a little bit too much for a one-man band. Obviously when big wildlife productions are using REDs and Cineflexes with 50 to 1000 CN20s on it and you have a whole team working on it, the image is worth it, the hassle is worth it. But for me, just being able to throw the R5 and a 70-200 on the RS3 Pro makes it super simple. It's lighter and less cumbersome, allowing me to hold the setup right above the waterline, which really gave me that blue chip wildlife look that I'm constantly chasing. Autofocus can really help make these shots easier to grab. While I don't use it all the time, what I'll do is switch the lens to autofocus so it can grab the middle of the pod, then switch it to manual focus so it doesn't bounce all over the place with every dolphin surfacing. So these are really some of my favorite shots I've ever taken. The water was so nice and calm. I was able to get super low. And again, just going back to that 5-year-old camera, like it still looks great. And it really allowed me to put my subjects in place instead of just filming them in a giant blue ocean. So in terms of versatility, having a camera that can shoot both incredible photos and incredible videos with ease, being small enough to put into different scenarios, whether it be underwater, on a gimbal, or handheld filming BTS. And while I still love my Komodo X, for interviews, for following a human subject in the field, for rigging it up as a long lens wildlife camera, really just using it as a properly built out production rig. And while I'm still planning on getting the Nikon ZR as well to kind of cover some of these bases, it's just really impressive that this camera has held up over all these years. And in terms of versatility, I can't really think of another camera that's utilized so much in the wildlife space and can cover so many bases. It's an absolute beast. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and talk about the R5. It's still such an impressive camera. If you're a wildlife camera person or photographer, let me know what cameras you use down in the comment section down below. I'd really love to hear the different cameras that you use and what you think is perfect for your workflow. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and comment, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you on the next adventure. Phew!